thank you everybody for joining us today. We've got quite a couple of people on the call. The room's still filling up, but yeah, like I said, thanks so much for joining us today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Marc, and professionally I'm a lifestyle financial planner. I typically work with women in finance, helping them identify, achieve, and maintain the lifestyle that they want without the fear of running out of money. Personally, I'm married to my beautiful wife, Nicole. I have two amazing kids, Luke and Sephora, and my family really is the purpose in my life. They're the reason that I do what I do, and together we are on our journey to building our best lives together. I'm also blessed in that I get to do this work for my clients who also like family to me, and it's really fulfilling helping them achieve their best lives. Our guests this morning are Suzelle and Stefan Leroux, both from Old Mutual. Thank you so much for being here, guys. Professionally, Suzelle is a legal advisor with Old Mutual, and she's been with the group for 17 years. Her role includes providing verbal and written legal, technical, and financial advice to people like me and my clients, people like you, in respect of estate planning, retirement, business assurance, and income tax planning. Then personally, Suzelle is happily married to her husband, Johan. They've got two boys, Gerard and Steph, and together they love exploring and traveling. She was sharing with us, they recently took a trip to Richtersveld Transverkeer Park. I can't really say that. And they had a whole 4x4 experience and camping, and much to Suzelle's dismay, there was no hot water, which is the first for her, but she managed to get through it. Yeah, putting herself out of her comfort zone and doing those things together with her family is really important. She's also from a small one-off town, another place I've never heard of. I think it's Heilbronn.
Yes.
Heilbronn, yeah.
In the Free State.
In the Free State, and now she finds herself in Johannesburg. Next, we've got Stefan. Professionally, Stefan is a financial planning coach at Old Mutual Wealth, where he's responsible for instilling integrated wealth planning principles and methodologies to people like me, who then relate to our clients. And this incorporates lifestyle financial planning, behavioral coaching to facilitate and enhance client experience. Personally, Stefan's passions in life are travel and theatre, and much to his dismay, due to COVID, he hasn't been able to do either of those for the last few years. Interesting, he studied opera, wow, for us, and still performs in community theatre, which he's really looking forward to getting back into now that COVID, I don't know, touch wood, is a thing of the past, hopefully. So guys, thanks so much for joining us. Just some quick housekeeping. So I guess we'll keep the webinar very informal as usual, and we welcome all and any questions at all times. You can send those through via the Q&A chat function. Let's just keep that for general chat. And we'll address these questions as we're going through the presentation and at the end if necessary. It's not going to be a death by PowerPoint presentation. There's no PowerPoint, but rather just a conversation between Suzelle, Stefan, and myself. And we really would love for you to join at any time. So feel free to send through the questions. We'll keep the presentation to about 45 minutes and address anything at the end if necessary. But just before we start, we'd like to kick it off with a poll and on the topic of intergenerational wealth transfer. So the question is, what does intergenerational wealth transfer mean to you? Couple of options there if you just want to have a look through and see which one makes the most sense to you. Guys, maybe while we get some answers in, we can sort of start. Stefan, to you, what does intergenerational wealth transfer actually mean?
Well, I think really that the purpose is to ensure that wealth is passed on from one generation to the other, if the client so wishes, in a way that is tax efficient, stable, and really equips the next generation for the money and the responsibility that they will inherit. So with that amount of money that might be transferred, it's very important that responsibility that comes with it. And preparing the next generation is key to prevent the inheritance from being squandered or lost too soon. And the key is really to start as early as possible. And in my work that I do with financial planners, I think that a planner is so important in this process, because that relationship would hopefully extend beyond of just one with the client, but also with the children and the heirs, to ensure that that legacy of the client is honored. And the planner would often also have the best insight in what the client's goals, dreams, and aspirations for the family is. And the financial planner can also assist with continuity of the financial plan and ensure that good investment principles are maintained. Good and trusted advice is really paramount for the heirs also during this very difficult time of transition. So that's sort of my lens on intergenerational planning.
Yeah, so from that, it sounds like it's not just a conversation that the parents or the first generation sort of has between the two of them. It's something that needs to be shared between everybody. Right? These are our wishes. This is what we're thinking, but not just stopping there, and it's like having a conversation with the next generation and saying, this is what we're thinking, this is what we want to do, how do you guys feel about this? Being on the receiving end of it, are you equipped to be on the receiving end of it, and what does that look like?
Yes, 100%. And I think if I can continue on that sort of train of thought, when it comes to our finances, we often require to have conversations that's not easy, especially difficult speaking about something like ill health or death. And intergenerational planning certainly touches on this. And that's why so many people just avoid this aspect or part of the financial planning. So to enable this conversation, it's very important also, in my view, to use a coaching framework. And a good financial planner should ask open-ended questions to first understand the situation properly, and then to elicit new possibilities for the client. And only once we see all the possibilities can we actually step into action. And these coaching conversations are used to help the client to see more of what they need to see so that they can find the best way forward for themselves. Because typically we make many assumptions in life, and very few of which are really based on factual data. And then we take action based on what we think is reality, often taking the wrong actions, which then has certain consequences. So it's really important to understand also your own relationship with money and the role that the finances play in your life. And understanding our relationship with money also helps with the communication with our partners and our heirs. And a good financial planner should help you unpack this. The planner is often that one financial specialist that will have the most comprehensive knowledge of your circumstances, and then hopefully also have a relationship with the heirs to help with that transition.
Thanks, Stefan. Suzelle, before we get to you, I just want to bring up the results quickly from that poll before I forget. Okay, so it's great to see that nobody's thinking it's a way to avoid paying estate duty, right? That's a given, so that's great. And then still, majority of people going with the answer of passing assets to your children on your death, which is one version of it, but another one being a way to positively impact your family while you're still around. And I think we'll touch on those two things there, and then a means to ensure continuity in the business. So all of those relevant. Yeah, it's good to see where we're kind of at from an audience perspective.
Yeah, Mark, if I can maybe just come in there, maybe just also to latch onto what Stefan said. I also think, obviously, for no person it's the same. It's not a one-size-fits-all answer. Obviously, if I'm involved in a business, that will impact my answer. If I'm just a professional person and I've, then obviously my assets, I would say, would differ. For instance, maybe I'm working for a company, and then obviously, then it will be different. So But a lot of times, maybe just touching on the business side, it's also about, and in my experience, I mean, sometimes, you know, children don't want to be involved in the family business. They're not interested. You know, they maybe want to, study to become a chemist, or, you know, and not work in the business. And that is, that is a very important conversation to have, because it might be that let's say you have more than one child. Let's say you have 3 children. Maybe, you know, the boys want to continue with it, but the girl not. She wants to become a medical doctor. And then the impact of the, you know, just in terms of maybe you as a testator or testatrix wants to leave an equal amount to your children. And then if the main asset in your estate is the business, you know, it can, you know, have an impact in the sense of, on the person that maybe continue with the business, your child must buy the others out, you know, just so it's really about, and I agree totally, to have those tough conversations, you know, and not just at a braai, you know, maybe to really have a conversation and to talk about it, and to say, okay, so this is what we thought, exactly what you said, but then, you know, what are your thoughts? And maybe then, I mean, I once had it as well, where children actually at that conversation said to their parents, no, we want to immigrate. We're not staying. So, you know, we don't want to be part of your business. But I totally agree that the conversations are I think, the starting point and the most important.
I think, like Stefan said, you know, a lot of the times we make these assumptions about what we want to happen. But, you know, in your example, so, you know, I assume my kids are going to take over the business. But maybe they've got no interest in that, right? And maybe they just don't know how to tell me that, because they know that I want them to do it, right? But it's not what they want for their life. So there's the emotional and the conversational side of things about, look, having that conversation and being with somebody who can facilitate that. But then also there's the practical side of, well, if, you know, child 1 is going to take it over, and they don't want to, and child 2 does, what does it mean? You know, if there's one asset that gets split and you've got these 2 conflicting views, what are we going to do about it? So, you know, I also found two definitions which I think resonate with the audience based on the answers. You know, it's the passing of assets from one generation of a family to another, which usually happens on death. Right? So I think that's the standard understanding of how to transfer wealth. Right? It's, I'm going to live, and when I'm done, what's left is left, right? And that could be a lot, or it could be a little, but what's left is left, and that's not my problem. You guys must deal with it. The second is really something that resonates a lot more with me. It's how families can use their wealth in a more collaborative way to support each other during their lifetimes. Right? So that really speaks to the type of work that we like to do. It's, you know, how can we use the combined wealth that we've got in the family to support all the different members, right? You know, so from the parents to the grandparents to the kids, while we're still alive, so we reap the fulfillment and we can see how everyone benefits from it, right? So I think now that we've got a general understanding as to what it is, how do we go about doing it? Suzelle, I'm going to start with you. You're kind of heavy on the I won't say product, but the knowledge stuff of that. You know, what are the different ways, the strategies that we can implement products to be used? Yeah.
Okay, so maybe I'll start with, my passion is estate planning. So in that sense, to really almost do the calculation, because I mean, we do estate planning as if something happened yesterday. So, rather to actually bite the bullet and look at, okay, so if I look at my circumstances now, my assets now, my liabilities now, my policies that I've got now, and my will now, even if you have a trust, even the impact of the trust, to look at all of that, do the calculations actually through an estate planner and see what the impact is. If I pass away, is there actually enough, or what I thought is going to be there, for my kids? Is it going to work the way that I think, or that I thought that it's going to work? So actually to test your, your scenario. in terms of what happened, to actually look at what the taxes are. And I mean, we read in the media, it costs so much to actually pass away, but do you know how much it costs? Do you actually, have you done the calculation? So I think that's one method, actually, to do that. And that's obviously speaking to that first point in terms of transferring it, you know, on your death, to your heirs. Another way. Yeah, sure.
So you made mention of an estate plan. What is an estate plan exactly, right? Is it a will? Is it a beneficiary document? Is it a calculation? What is an estate plan?
Okay, so an estate plan is basically where you start. I always had a lecturer at university and he said, okay, lay the table first. So the table that we lay before we can actually eat is assets and liabilities. So you first look at your assets and liabilities, your policies, everything that you've got. You look at your marital regime in terms of what is the impact of the marital regime, you know, if you pass away, or on your assets. And then you actually look at taxes. So you know, you calculate the taxes, for instance, capital gains tax. What is the impact of capital gains tax when you pass away? What is the impact of, you know, executors' fees, estate duty on your estate? So you test that against that, whether there's sufficient provision for that. If you need to make provision, for instance, for your parents, or if you are divorced and you, for instance, need to pay maintenance, you know, you even look at that. You do a calculation and make sure that there is enough, you know, for that responsibility that you have to address. And in the end, you actually look at, you know, the practical implication as well. You look at the will and you see whether practically what the client wants is going to happen, or you look at loopholes, you know, in terms of that. So, you know, what happens if you and your children pass away simultaneously? Have you thought about, you know, one car crash, maybe, different, you know, circumstances? I mean, if we just think about the impact of COVID, you know, COVID actually caused where people maybe, you know, there was more people that pass away, you know, in one family. And then have you made provision for what happens if that person, maybe your elderly parent, or, you know, a sister or whatever, pass away before you? So what is the impact in terms of your planning? So you look at different scenarios and see whether that is practical or not, and whether you've addressed that in your will. So it's not just the will. You haven't done estate planning if you just drafted a will. You must actually do the calculations, and then from the calculations you look at your, you know, the practicality of your will. And then if you have a trust as well, your trust deed, is your trust deed maybe in conflict with your will? To make sure that there's no conflict with all these, you know, documentation. And in all of that, I even want to throw in there as well your marital regime, your antenuptial contract, the way that you married. Do you know what's excluded, you know, in your antenuptial contract, or maybe what's included? Do you know what the, you know, what the impact is? Because a lot of clients that we see don't know what's going on in their partner's estate, you know, but they may be married, you know, with the accrual, and then they don't know what the accrual claim implication is, you know, on the estate. And obviously, if you've got a business, you have to add onto that. So it becomes more, you know, involved in this business documentation that you also have to look at. So it's actually answering the question, what happens on my death? And it depends then on the client's circumstances, what you throw into that pot, in terms of whether there's a business, you know, as well, and what assets, etc. But it's really testing the situation, you know, what happens on my death, but in numbers, and then also practicality.
So yeah, that's what I was going to say. So it sounds like it's estate plan is what's going to happen on my death, and we look at it in twofold. It's the hard facts, which say, okay, so on death, these are all the assets, the liabilities, these are the taxes that's going to be applied, and this is the net sort of number that we're dealing with, right? And then it goes to the wishes to say, okay, in your head, you've told me you want things to happen like A, B, C, D, and E, but your will says it's going to happen B, C, D, and A, right? So it's understanding if the will is written in such a way that it will speak to the numbers and speak to your wishes. So do the numbers translate into your wishes, and are your wishes articulated onto onto your will. Right?
Yes.
Stefan, I just want to bring you in here. I'm going to call you the conversations guy, right? Because that's like your expertise. You know, Suzelle was saying a lot of things, you know, about, you know, what happens if we all die together? You know, what happens if we're in a car crash? What happens if we get COVID? These are all things that, as she was talking, you know, it makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable. And I think it makes, you know, our clients feel uncomfortable, because you don't typically want to have that conversation to say, hey guys, as a family, what happens if we all die together? How do we have that conversation?
I would say maybe have something like consider developing a family charter, for example, as a financial roadmap for not only the family, but also for those people who assist them to look after their wealth. So this should include the family's traditions, their purpose and values. It can touch on the family's story and how they've built their wealth, their attitude to money and how it should be saved or spent. And this plan should be a roadmap providing insight on how the wealth should be managed and invested for the future generations. And it's vital that the family shares this charter with all the professionals dealing with their finances, wealth managers, portfolio managers, the lawyers and accountants, fiduciary specialists, everyone involved, so that they're aware of the future plans and goals of the family. Many wealthy families have adopted a family constitution as a way of instilling values and managing conflict. Although a family constitution is not a binding document, it can take many forms. It's just a robust way to manage the intergenerational wealth transfer and to build consensus on key issues, such as who runs the family business, what are the ethical and moral issues of the family, do they have an investment strategy which could include ethical things like social responsible investment, and even what is the family's philanthropic vision. So something like that, and having those conversations would be able to just give clarity to everyone involved, especially in a case where you said, like, if there's a family obliteration event or something, what happens there?
Thanks, Stefan. As you're talking, it sounds very complicated and high level, but you know, through our experience, it obviously isn't that complicated. But I think what's important is that it's an active part of your plan, right? So you're acknowledging that at some point I am going to pass away, and there is going to be excess assets, and we do want those assets to go to our children, and we want them to be able to deal with them, right? So it's number one, being aware of that, acknowledging that, and then, you know, being, I guess, for lack of a better word, but being an adult about it, and having a conversation with everybody, right? And then, yes, you may need to get an attorney and an accountant and all of those people involved. But if that's your circumstances, and if you want this thing to play out the way you actually want it to play out, it may be necessary to include all of those people in your life and in this plan, right?
Yeah, exactly.
If can I maybe just add there, you know, as an example, I mean, people maybe with a special needs child, you know, again, coming back to the conversation, it's extremely important for the client to actually share that with the financial advisor, because for that child, for instance, a normal trust, you know, wouldn't be as beneficial as a special trust, you know, just coming from a tax point of view. So again, it's about sharing exactly what, you know, what your concerns are. And then only, you know, the advisor, Marc, or the broker like yourself can come with solutions, or can come with possible, you know, solutions. And then again, coming back to what Stefan said in terms of the family, you know, maybe the grandfather, that's what he wants to do. He wants to make sure that this special needs child always, you know, cared for, maybe in a trust, etc., and that everyone then knows that. You know, in terms of maybe if there's a business involved, etc. But to know that, you know, that is something that have to be catered for, and that the whole family is actually in, you know, on that plan. So coming back again to the conversation, and no family's recipe is exactly the same, because our circumstances are different.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got an estate plan, we've got a will. We've got a question on a will here. It's from Melissa. She's saying, if somebody has offshore assets, there's no trust, so they're held in their personal capacity, and would you recommend that they have a separate will for those assets? What if the assets are in two different geographic locations? Is there a need? Well, I need a will for my house in Germany, for instance, and one for my cash offshore in the US. How does that work? South African will in Germany, will in the US.
Okay, so I'll take that question. I'm sure Stefan doesn't want it. I'm just teasing Stefan. Okay, so yes, definitely I normally advise a separate will for your foreign assets. It depends also what kind of assets it is. So for instance, if it's a house, like was mentioned, it's better to have a separate will in that country dealing with the legislation of that country. However, what's also important is you must make sure then that your South African will is specifically mentioned that say the house, for instance, in Germany is excluded from the South African estate. The reason why I'm saying is that there isn't an overlap. The benefit of it is as well that you don't delay the estate in South Africa because of different jurisdictions. Because obviously the executive in South Africa will have to appoint, someone then in Germany, and there might be, language barriers. So in that sense, it does make sense, to deal with that separately. Normally, if it's like cash or if it's an investment, then that can be dealt with in terms of, if I can call it, the South African will. Or sometimes if it's a product where you can actually nominate a beneficiary, then it's dealt with directly, on that beneficiary nomination. However, if there's different jurisdictions with different legislation, I strongly advise that one actually look into, separating those. And as I said, just to make specific mention in your South African will that you exclude that, because otherwise you might have a contradiction in terms of what your will, for instance, in Germany says and what your will in South Africa say. And I want to add onto that, some jurisdictions have got forced heirship. So there's different rules and regulations, over the world. So you can have a will for your worldwide assets. So if I just don't mention, that it's for my South African assets only, I just, bequeath everything in a will that's drafted in South Africa. That can be a worldwide will, so dealing with everything then. But as I said, that can take very long and can delay the estate. So it is actually better to look also at someone that's got the expertise in that country where you have got that asset, and rather get them to draft a will, rather than having someone in South Africa, for instance, not necessarily having that expertise on the legislation in that country.
Okay, so basically you could have a worldwide will in South Africa, which sounds like the easy option. One will drafted in South Africa, but potentially you're going to run into some problems down the line if you pass away with assets in different jurisdictions and different rules, like you mentioned, yes. Right? So if you're going to have sufficient assets, well, I don't want to say sufficient, that's my assumption, but if you have assets in another country, then it's probably a good idea to have a will drafted in that country, which speaks directly to those assets. And then your South African will must just reference that this will exclude the assets in Germany, for instance. There's a will in Germany which will deal with that.
Yes.
And or sometimes does that allow for your South African estate to carry on and the German estate carries on, at the same time?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
I wanted to mention something else now. Sorry, it will maybe come back to me.
Good. Okay, so we've kind of understood what is a estate plan entail, right? So the actual calculations, the will, that kind of deals with things on death, and maybe we can just touch on some of the implications, right? So of your will and taxes and those sorts of things, right? So if you pass away, things you can't get rid of, right? There is going to be CGT, capital gains tax on the assets, estate duty, and I think estate duty is one of the ones that gets me. Is you work so hard over your entire life, and you hopefully you've lived life to the fullest, but then when you pass away and there's excess assets, you're still going to pay so 20% or potentially more, depending on the size of the estate at that point in time, right? There's no getting away from that.
Yes, you can run, but you can't hide.
Okay. So if we wanted to not necessarily avoid the taxes, right, but change the planning up to say we're going to do this intergenerational wealth transfer thing, but while we're still alive, how would we go about doing it then?
You can make use of donations. Every person can donate, but you can only donate up to 100,000 Rand per annum. So if you're married, it's per couple in 200,000. Okay. A lot of people actually, then create a trust and almost call it like an investment trust. And the money must actually flow. So it shouldn't just be like book entries. So the actual 100,000 Rand then, goes across to that trust. You don't pay any donations tax on that. However, if you want to donate more, you pay 20% donations tax up to the amount of 30 million. Okay, but then of course you have that 100,000 that you can deduct. So that's a way to do that, whilst being alive. I mean, obviously 100,000, if you have a sizable estate, is chipping away, at it very slowly. But if you start early, like Stefan, suggested also, if you start early, I mean, it does make a difference. If you start and not put it off.
Yeah, I think the key there is starting early, right? 100,000 doesn't sound like a lot, but there's two of you, so it's 200,000. And, it typically, if you want to use it for specific things, say like your kids' education or your grandkids' education or whatever it is, if you've got 18 years worth of doing that's quite a lot of money that you could actually move and get out of your estate and into a trust that can be used then for the benefit of the beneficiaries.
Yes.
So a trust is a vehicle, right, that you can use. Is donations the only way of moving things across? Like, what about a loan account or a loan or?
You can actually move, let's say, for instance, you have a house, say a second house maybe that you want to move across to a trust. Yes, you can sell it. Obviously, if the trust is just recently, created, then obviously the trust doesn't have the money to pay for it. So what a lot of people do is they actually enter into an agreement with the trust. The trust buys, the house from you, for example, or the asset on outstanding loan account. You can't have, the loan account without any, you can't have an interest-free loan account anymore. So if the trust owes you a lot of money, you have to add, interest onto that. And obviously, then one need to look at, so how's the trust going to, pay that back? So just coming back to estate planning, I mean, in the end, so you don't get rid of that house or that asset. The value, the loan account is still a value in your estate, but it is a way to actually transfer that asset into the trust. And then, of course, in your will, you can say, that I, for instance, bequeath this outstanding loan account to the trust, meaning that the trust doesn't owe you the money, anymore on your passing away. And then obviously one can look at creating liquidity, in the trust via maybe, a life policy. That's also something to look at. If it's an existing trust, maybe the trust has got more properties, rental income coming in, then the trust can start paying off that loan account, that the trust owes you. So yeah, it depends really on the circumstances.
Okay, so the trust, it physically needs capital, right, to acquire these things, and you can do it through the loan account. But the loan account, it's not a method to reduce your estate, because that loan account will always be an asset in your estate, so it'll still be dutyable.
Yeah, it is actually a way to, a lot of people do that. They call it estate, pegging or asset pegging. So obviously the moment that you transfer that house, that value, that was a loan account. So let's say it's 2 million as an example. So it's 2 million Rand in, and it's pegged at that, at that 2 million. Obviously, if you think that, this trust is, or that this property is going to, increase in value, that is a way to peg that value in terms of the loan account then, in your estate. But obviously now, as I said, you have to charge interest on top of that. You can't do it interest free anymore. Just very important is, I think, to actually look also when you create a trust, to look at the definition of beneficiaries, so again, coming back to the conversations, so who do you want to benefit from it? And you have to think further as well, in terms of, yes, your beneficiaries, maybe your grandchildren. What about if your children gets married, if they're minors now, and do you also want to provide for the in-laws, or your son-in-law and your daughter-in-law, and a lot of people just keep that within the bloodline, so really just to their beneficiaries and to their children and to their grandchildren. Obviously, adoptive children will also, under the definition, fall under, beneficiaries of children. But to think then further, so who do you want to benefit, and to write that into the trust deed, of who can benefit, from that trust.
Stefan, I want to bring you in here because Suzelle said something there which made me feel incredibly uncomfortable. I can't imagine Marc's parents creating a trust and nominating me as a beneficiary, but saying that my spouse is excluded, right? That is, I don't know. How do you have that conversation? Maybe not how you have the conversation. I think that the question is there's a conversation to be had here, right?
Well, I think with anything is really to understand what the person's structure of interpretation is. So depending on who you want to speak to, the client or the heir but it's really important to unpack with them how they're feeling about this, what comes up for them, how did they actually see this going forward, and really just sort of see where they get stuck. Why are they so focused on this specific thing, and why is it making them uncomfortable? So it's really about just unpacking that. Often the client would have their own answers. We don't have to give them the answers. All we need to do is to give them a lens in terms of show them, okay, this is how you are viewing it, and make them understand why they are feeling the way that they do. And then often they will sort this out for themselves. We just need to guide them and ask the right questions. And that is the skill that often we need. And hopefully a good financial planner would be able to assist you with that.
It's maybe, sort of saying, okay, so in your mind, you just want it to go to me, right? But along with me is my spouse, right? And there's a reason you don't want it to go to my spouse. What is that reason? What are you worried about? What are you scared of? What happened to you in the past to make you feel this way? Because what could potentially happen, and this is one of those unintended consequences, is my family makes me the beneficiary, excludes my spouse. My spouse and I have a huge argument about it, and it causes unnecessary conflict in our lives, all because we didn't have a conversation with my parents who nominated us, right? So we could have mitigated all of that by having conversations. It sounds like I keep saying conversations, but it really is so important to get everybody on the same page and understand why are we doing things the way we're doing it. Right.
And also then, Marc, for instance, to have your own planning in place. I mean, that you don't count on the inheritance, for instance, coming from your parents, but you make provision then for your spouse and your children. And unfortunately, in my experience, that's exactly the case. That we people will say, but, and normally it's a divorce rate, that make parents feel uncomfortable. They kind of want to protect the family business, or maybe the farm, or an asset that they have for a very long time in the family, and where they would say, okay, it's fine, so we'll make provision for Marc and for Marc's children, and in that way help his spouse. So maybe, for instance, to pay for the education of the children will be taken care of. So in that sense, she doesn't need to provide for them then necessarily financially, but we're not going to leave this in charge or in control, of, our daughter-in-law, in that sense. You hear where I'm coming from? But again, the conversation, because it impacts your financial plan and it impacts your parents' financial plan, as an example.
Just you saying that, has made me feel a lot better in this hypothetical scenario. But it's, the benefit is for your life and for your kids' life. And yes, we want your spouse to be part of that and to benefit from that. We just don't want her to have control over everything for whatever reason, right? But that's a lot easier conversation for me to go and have now than for me to say, hey, my folks have completely excluded you and it's just me and the kids, right? So through talking these things out, we're able to, I don't know, sort of mitigate these kind of conversations.
And plan for them, yes, yeah.
Suzelle, something's come up from a perspective of having assets offshore again. Citus, right? What is Citus? Are you familiar with that? You're familiar with that? And how does that impact your South African plan?
Yeah, unfortunately, I cannot give advice on, countries, we don't deal with the, legislation. I would advise the person to, I think it's in the UK, if they have assets in UK, and then, about the taxes that they pay there. It's UK or US, I'm not sure. But they must actually deal with someone that specializes again in that jurisdiction, with regard to the taxes.
So basically, I think Citus is it's almost like a state duty, but in a foreign country, in the US or the UK, and it's probably going to come back down to having a plan to cater for that via your offshore will, right? So you need a local estate plan and potentially a foreign estate plan to ensure that there's sufficient liquidity. So if you're going to incur death taxes in another country, that there's sufficient liquidity to cover that, right?
I've heard that it's as high as 40%, but I can't say that is true. But I agree with you. In the end, it's about whether it's practical and whether you have made provision for enough liquidity in the estate to be able to pay all of that. Because if we just talk about if you don't have enough cash in your estate to pay the costs, I mean, normally the executors give an option to your, to your heirs. So normally they'll say, okay, Suzelle, so there's a cash shortfall. Can you pay in the cash shortfall? If the heirs can't, then they have to wind up the estate. Then most probably they will go into, forced, selling of the assets, and that's not necessarily what you intended. So hence why it's so important to actually plan and to see how much cash is needed in your estate to transfer the assets that you don't have to sell them.
I think that's so important. It goes back to the idea that in my mind, this is how things are going to play out. Like, there's a couple of properties, each kid gets a property, that's great, but there's costs that go with moving properties within an estate, right? And if we haven't made provision, when I say things like provision, it's not necessarily through a selling or implementing a life policy. It's just making sure that there's cash somewhere to pay for the costs that are going to be incurred. Otherwise, things aren't going to play out the way you want it, right? There's not going to be 3 properties to distribute because we've actually got to sell one to raise money to cover the costs to distribute these assets.
Absolutely. And a lot of times people also think that, let's say I've got 3 kids, let's say I have 3 properties in your example. If I leave a property to each, for instance, in a trust, I mean, what about the maintenance if the kids are minor, in that property? And it's not to say that, maybe it's rented out, whatever the situation is, or maybe the rental income is not enough to actually maintain the property and to maintain the minor child. So again, making sure that there is actually cash to maintain that and to pay fees like trustee fees, to actually look after the property. So again, coming back to making sure that there are cash to assist, with the costs. Yeah,
and so your example was a minor child, but if we look at passing assets on death, it could be my wish to give to my 2 older kids, but maybe they don't want those assets. Maybe they don't want the physical property in wherever. They would much rather have the cash. And maybe they'd rather have the cash now. It sounds selfish, but being able to give them that gift, but give it now, may have a greater meaning on their lives and what they can do with it than receiving it at a later point in time.
Yeah, I think what I believe in is inheritance is a privilege, it's not a right. But I think that can be ironed out in the sense of with conversations to say then, okay, Dad, I'd rather have the cash now, but then of course you need to take the donations tax into consideration. So the parents should just also be aware of, because a lot of times, I mean, obviously all of us have got good intentions in terms of providing for kids and for grandkids, but I don't always think that grandparents know about the implications of donations tax, and in that sense that they just don't get into that trap. And maybe have to pay donations tax of 20%. I mean, the state duty is also 20% up to the amount of 30 million rand. So, they can give whatever they want to give, but then they have to add 20% on top of that if it's over 100,000.
So I just want to touch on that. So practically speaking, because a lot of times people will say to me, what if I just buy a house in my son's name? No one's going to know, right? I'll take the cash, I'll go buy it. So what are the practical implications and how do they know about it?
From my understanding, they need to ask where the money is coming from. So obviously, if your parents are buying you a property in your name, in terms of the cash that's transferred in, that is a way to actually pick up that there was a donation. So a lot of times, people then rather have a loan account or a loan agreement, structured, and then the person inherited, on death. And with donations, in terms of also how to pick it up, it has to be reported on your income tax, that you submit to say that I donated this amount to Marc, and then Marc on his side needs to indicate that I received a donation. So that, that link should be on both sides. But with regards to a property, I mean, obviously you have to declare to the attorneys that's doing the transfer, where the money is coming from. So in terms of FICA, and all of that, you have to actually declare where the money is coming from. So it isn't that easy as it's been, years ago, where you can actually just buy, everyone in properties.
Also, I saw something that, if the parents don't, in this example, the parents don't declare the donation and the son doesn't declare receiving the donation, both parties are actually going to be liable for this if caught, right?
Now, donations tax, just on that, in terms of the Income Tax Act, the donor is responsible for the donations tax. If SARS can't get the donations tax from the donor, then he can go to the donee. So, so it's actually going both sides. But like you say, if there's no, I think if that is not reported, then obviously you still need to report it when you buy the asset. In terms of to declare where the money's, where the money is coming from.
Yeah, so I think there's no way around it, right? You're going to pay 20% when you pass away, or you're going to pay 20% if you gift it earlier, right? I think that the main difference is if you've done your plan and you've got sufficient assets to sustain your cost of living until the presumed date of death, and you can gift to your kids or whoever while you're still alive, and you're able to see them reap the benefit of it, I think the fulfillment that you get is a lot more rewarding than when you're dead and you can't see the benefit that it has. Right? Okay, guys, we've got 5 minutes. Stefan, anything from your side that you want to add quickly before we wrap up?
Yeah, maybe just a final thought for me. I think it's so important to really just go back to the basics, because more important than just having this pile of money or leaving this pile of money to someone is really having a proper plan for that money. And that's where goal setting, we all know about goal setting. We hear it at school, we do it in our workplace, but often we don't really do that for ourselves. And goal setting is such a powerful process for thinking about our ideal future and for motivating ourselves to turn our vision of this future into a reality. And the process of setting goals helps you to choose where you want to go in life, but knowing precisely what you want to achieve, you know where you have to concentrate your efforts. And a good financial planner, again, would be able to help you with those conversations in order for you to envision this ideal future, what you want to do for yourself, for your children, and with your business, for example. So it's, again, having those conversations where you can really unpack the things that's important to you. And that is the basis of everything, in my point of view.
Thanks, Stefan. So it's about understanding what you want, building it out, and then having conversations with all the people involved who it's going to impact, right?
Correct. So once you know what you want to do, then the planner can help you to bring in the legal people and all the others that will assist you in achieving what your goals are.
Suzelle, last thoughts, comments from your side?
When Stefan was talking, I thought about that advertisement that Mutual had years ago. You know, like everything starts with a plan. And I think that's maybe the crux of all of this, to really go back. And I would also like to, you know, say to people that the time that you spend now is time that you save your family and your loved ones later on. You know, to sort out things and not knowing what's going on. The benefit of having a plan is you can have your estate plan together with your will, and you leave it then for your loved ones, and they know, you know, what's going to happen. And even if you have that conversation, and I think that is really, you know, the legacy that you want to leave behind, that your stuff is organized, and that it happened, you know, what you wanted to happen, and that, yeah, that you were open, and that you actually included people in terms of the conversations, you know, with your estate plan. So yeah, I would say, you know, get a reputable financial planner, you know, that can get you, you know, in contact with people that know how to do estate plans and that test everything. It's not a thumbs up, and it's not a one size fits all. Your circumstances are unique, so your plan will be different to the next person's plan. But yeah, get your stuff in order, please. Thank you.
Sounds like, you know, it's not just the gift of inheritance or giving while you're alive, but it's the gift of having done it properly from the beginning, including all the people that are going to be affected. You know, even if we say it's when you pass away, knowing full well that everybody's aware of what's going to happen, what the intentions are, and that it's going to play out in exactly the way that we anticipated it to play out. Having that, being on the receiving end of that, I would say would be a great way to go out, right? Knowing that your family is not going to be fighting over money, everybody knows, and the legacy can kind of just lead from there. Guys, thank you so much. This really has been great and super informative. You guys are a wealth of knowledge, and I really thank you for your time. Lastly, from my side, you know, it takes a lot of hard work to generate wealth to a point where you're able to think about gifting and intergenerational wealth transfer. But, you know, in order to successfully do this, I think it comes down to three things. And that's really having a well thought out lifestyle financial plan, something that you've built together with the people important in your life, a thorough estate plan, which speaks to your financial plan, and then, yeah, making sure everybody around you who's involved is on the same page. So yeah, if this is something you want to explore further, reach out to me. I am that person that both of these two lovely people keep referring to as that financial planner. So yeah, just joking. Thank you, guys. I really appreciate everything. Thanks so much for taking the time to be here, and enjoy the rest of your day. Cheers.
Thank you, Marc.
Thank you. Bye-bye.